Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis tonight. So President Joe Biden has finally addressed all of the anti-Semitic, pro-Hamas terrorism across college campuses and all of the violence, but in remarks that only lasted about 2.5 minutes, in which Biden failed to actually say that he stood with Israel. And of course he can't, right? Because that would mean, under the Marxist theory under which his administration operates, that he would be essentially standing with the aggressors and with the oppressors, because in the Marxist worldview, it's always the oppressors versus the oppressed. And all of the media has framed this as Israel being the oppressor. And so regardless of the violence across campus, Biden had to tailor his remarks very carefully. And I think that's why he has gone for weeks without saying anything. And this is all that he said in just very, very brief remarks. Listen to this.
The second is the rule of law. Both must be upheld. We are not an authoritarian nation where we silence people or squash dissent. The American people are heard. In fact, peaceful protest is in the best tradition of how Americans respond to consequential issues. But neither are we a lawless country. We are a civil society, and order must prevail. Throughout our history, we've often faced moments like this because we are a big, diverse, free-thinking, and freedom-loving nation. In moments like this, there are always those who rush in to score political points. But this isn't a moment for politics. It's a moment for clarity. So let me be clear. Peaceful protest in America. Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest. Threatening people, intimidating people, instilling fear in people is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Dissent is essential to democracy, but dissent must never lead to disorder or to denying the rights of others so students can finish the semester and their college education. Look, it's basically a matter of fairness. It's a matter of what's right. There's the right to protest, but not the right to cause chaos. People have the right to get an education, the right to get a degree, the right to walk across the campus safely without fear of being attacked. But let's be clear about this as well. There should be no place on any campus, no place in America for anti-Semitism or threats of violence against Jewish students. There is no place for hate speech or violence of any kind, whether it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or discrimination against Arab Americans or Palestinian Americans. It's simply wrong. There's no place for racism in America. It's all wrong. It's un-American. I understand people have strong feelings and deep convictions. In America, we respect the right and protect the right for them to express that.
All right, so there was a lot in there actually to agree with. He condemned violence as not covered under the First Amendment and the right to peacefully protest, the right to peaceful assembly, which is the First Amendment text. He condemned anti-Semitism, but notice how Joe Biden wrapped up conduct with hate speech. And he didn't parse this well enough to say, even if we disagree with very bad ideas, the First Amendment always protects the right to engage freely and have a free discussion of ideas and debates. The founders wanted more speech, not less, and certainly nothing that would quell even what we would label, and maybe appropriately, hate speech. Because once you start saying that certain types of speech can be punished under the rule of law, then it's just wide open gates as far as what is not speech that the government allows and what viewpoint discrimination continues to persist. So, Republicans in the House yesterday actually went along with this entire idea under a new bill that is titled the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. And this headline coming from NBC News that said the House passes anti-Semitism bill with broad bipartisan support amid campus arrests. The House passed a bipartisan bill Wednesday to combat anti-Semitism as pro-Palestinian protests royal colleges across the United States. The measure passed 320 to 91. 21 Republicans and 70 Democrats voted, and the bill, titled the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, would mandate that the Education Department adopt the broad definition of anti-Semitism used by, listen to this, a policy interest group, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, an intergovernmental group to enforce anti-discrimination laws. The international group defines anti-Semitism, at least currently on its website, as a, quote, certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. The group adds that, quote, rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism include such things as calling for the killing or harming of Jews or holding Jews collectively responsible for actions taken by Israel. The bill's prospects in the Senate are unclear. Well, Representative Chip Roy was against this bill, and he pointed out in a fiery speech from the House floor yesterday that this bill didn't even pass through committee. There was no opportunity for comment or debate or even amendment. Listen to this.
But here's the thing. Yet again today on the floor of the House of Representatives, we had another show vote to make people feel good about themselves by passing a bill that says anti-Semitism in the title. That's what happened. And it was put on the floor by Republican leadership. And it was put on the floor by Republican leadership despite knowing that it was pulled from going through committee. We didn't have a chance to amend it. We didn't have a chance to discuss it, to debate it. We didn't have a hearing on it. It was jammed through to take advantage of this political moment while all of these horrific things are going around the country. Republican leadership wanted to score political points, so they moved through legislation without the kind of deliberation, debate that is supposed to be carried out by the people in this chamber.
So this was obviously very rushed from a bipartisan, or I would say the uniparty in Washington, D.C. to do something. And under the auspices of doing something, rather than enabling legislation that maybe can enforce actual laws on campus against violence, or perhaps just having a resolution condemning anti-Semitism and putting the definition in the legislation itself, not borrowing from some policy interest group. No, this bill has very strong First Amendment concerns when we're looking at being the thought police instead of chasing actual and punishing actual conduct. We'll talk about this with attorney Abe Hamilton.A. when we come right back. And now you can own a piece of that history. I'm thrilled to announce the official Newt Gingrich contract with America Coin from our friends at Legacy Precious Metals in partnership with Speaker Gingrich. This limited edition 1 ounce 99.99% silver coin commemorates the historic victory in 1994 when the Republican Party, under Speaker Gingrich's guidance, took control of Congress. The Newt Gingrich contract with America Coin also symbolizes the transformative political platform that led to the landmark achievements like the overhaul of the U.S. welfare system and the Balanced Budget Act. This is a limited edition coin that will sell out. So whether you're looking for the perfect gift or you want to own a piece of history, act fast before they run out. The Newt Gingrich contract with America Coin is more than an investment. It's a tribute to honest government and America. You can order it online at newtgingrichsilvercoin.com. That's newtgingrichsilvercoin.com and use promo code Jenna, that's JENNA, to get $10 off your purchase. Go to newtgingrichsilvercoin.com now. And joining me now for reaction to the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act is Abe Hamilton.A., who is an attorney and the host of the Hamilton Corner on the American Family Radio Network, where I also host Jenna Ellis in the morning from 8 to 9 Eastern AM. So, Abe, thanks so much for joining, and really interested in your reaction and your thoughts on this bill that was just rushed through Congress.
Yeah, it's unfortunate and greatly disappointing because it is right to condemn anti-Semitism. However, we should not expand its definition to such a degree to where it's problematic for the First Amendment, but also introducing international law concepts. And the legislation, as I've reviewed it, it has the capacity to criminalize certain parts of the Bible. I don't think that's what we should be doing at all. And then learning from Congressman Chip Roy that it didn't even go through the regular process. There was no opportunity for legislators to offer amendments. It was not submitted to the committee process. It's just a rush job that really smacks of an effort to score political points, but not really a willingness to consider the American constitutional practice and freedoms that we enjoy under the First Amendment. It's the old adage that you really are not a free speech supporter unless you're willing to contend for speech that you disagree with, that you find to be virulent, that you vehemently disagree with. Nevertheless, those principles redound to protect that type of speech, so that we don't throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater, responding to a particular moment politically, while at the same time traipsing long-held constitutional freedoms.
Yeah, so well said. And, to me, it would have been better served for the now uniparty, I think that is in DC, to have some kind of enabling legislation that directly addresses maybe federal funding to some of these universities that are not willing to quell these ridiculous encampments or these protests that turn violent, like we've seen at Columbia, UCLA, and across the country. But this focused just on hate speech and taking a definition from a website that is a policy organization, totally outside of even the four corners of the legislation itself. I mean, this is ripe, I think, for abuses, as you mentioned. But it really surprises me that Republicans, even such as Jim Jordan and Speaker Johnson, I mean, people who we would otherwise generally think of as conservatives, supported this.
Yeah, it really, really is alarming. I mean, when you consider the reality that our Congress is not meant to be a rapid response entity, when you have, you know, 535 people that have to participate in order to bring anything into fruition legally, it reveals the fact that it's not meant to be a rapid response notion. But it seems, and I hate to say this, but the reality seems that this is promulgated to be nothing more than a political ploy. I have a very novel idea. How about we simply enforce the laws that we currently have? How about we understand that free speech is free speech, is not the right to occupy a building. It's not the right to prohibit other people's free movement around a campus. It's not the right to set up illegal encampments. But at the exact same time, we maintain our long cherished, long held freedom of speech. It seems absurd to me that this isn't what we're doing. And what you pointed out is exactly what should be happening. If the federal government is providing federal funds, which they are, to these universities that are harbors for regressivism, harbors for anti-Semitism, why not attack them where it really hurts, in the power of the purse? Remove their funding, as opposed to trampling the First Amendment for all Americans in an effort to seem to be politically responsive to an immediate flashpan moment.
Yeah, and this is where it is so frustrating that there is more opportunity, it seems, in the 24/7 media cycle, and with the rise of social media and this type of consumerism, that our legislators and our lawmakers often are much more worried about scoring immediate political points rather than having considered debate, or maybe sitting back and saying, we don't need to do anything except exactly what you just said: enforce the law that's on the books. And they don't always have to do something. But it seems like that's what the social media and the 24/7 media cycle now expects from lawmakers, is that if anything bad happens in the world, then suddenly we need an excess of legislation. That is not how the founders intended it. So as this moves forward to the Senate, what would you say to the American people who are very concerned about this, to maybe call their senators and say, this isn't a good idea?
Yeah, I would simply encourage the citizens to call their senators, oppose this legislation. I mean, when you learn that it wasn't even submitted to a committee process on the House side, that smacks of a usurpation, frankly, of the normal process, and to do something far more enduring, far more constitutionally faithful, and far more important for the American people, and which I think also constitutional, is to affect the pocketbooks of these schools, and to highlight the distinctions when you have places like New York, where Alvin Bragg doesn't really like felonies unless it has to do with Donald Trump, but will have these people who are violating the law in other areas arrested only to be released. highlight that contrast with other portions of the country and enforce the laws that currently exist. I'd encourage the American people to contact their senators to oppose this legislation and to allow our legislators to get back to the important business of doing things that are actually legal and constitutional and actually will help the American people.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me to see how there's always strings attached to federal funding, and this is a way that we have basically negated the idea of federalism, where we've eroded state sovereignty more and more with all of these federal funds, federal bailouts, all of these things. And yet, when we have finally an opportunity to say, hey, there needs to be actually strings attached to this type of funding that comes through the Department of Education and to these universities, you actually want good strings attached to that, and yet Congress can't manage to do that. And so it seems like everything always happens in a backward fashion, but this is what we're faced with, Abe, with the uniparty. And so there is a call in just about the last minute and a half we have with you. There is a call from Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massey, Andy Biggs, to have that motion to vacate the chair. And they're suggesting that this will be voted on even as early as next week. What do you think of the propriety of that motion at this point in time?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's a good call to pursue. And you mentioned before whether or not Congress can do something meaningful, or is it that they won't do what's meaningful? I think it's more an issue of won't versus can't. But concerning the motion to vacate the speaker, I'm not sure that that's the right move, especially running up to the 2024 election, because if you vacate the speakership with Mike Johnson now, then what was going to happen next? Do you have somebody that you're planning to fill that position? I just don't. I see that as being more counterproductive than actually being substantively helpful in what's going on. I think what needs to happen at this juncture is that the caucus encourages Speaker Johnson to do what he promised to do and to maintain a commitment to constitutional fidelity and attempt to set the course to not only regain the presidency in November, but to expand its majority of the House and try to make inroads in the Senate in 2024.
Yeah, well said. And I think if we end up actually vacating the chair, there's not going to be a consensus, and we may even end up with Speaker Hakeem Jeffries, which, despite what a lot of the far right conservatives are suggesting, that actually would be worse than Speaker Johnson. But we need to have a Republican caucus and coalition. But Abraham Hamilton III, always appreciate you coming on. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Well, friends, you might have heard that Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of their box stores or shopping channels the way that they used to. They've been part of this cancel culture, so they want to pass along the savings directly to you by having a $25 extravaganza. I love that word, extravaganza. When Mike started MyPillow, it was just a one-product company. With the help of his dedicated employees, they now have hundreds of products, some you may not even know about. To get the word out, I want to invite my listeners to check out their $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use My Pillows are just $25. My Pillow sandals, also awesome, only $25. Their 6-pack towel sets are $25. And brand new 4-pack dish towels, you guessed it, just $25. For the first time ever, the premium My Pillows with the all-new Giza fabric, just $25. And orders over $75 will receive free shipping, too. This amazing offer won't last long. Go to mypillow.com, use the promo code Jenna, or call 800-564-8475 today. That's 800-564-8475, or go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Jenna. Well, today is Thursday, so you know that means everybody's favorite time is the Thursday Roundup. Today's power panel includes Robin Biro, who is a former U.S. veteran and also a Democrat strategist. And we also have Saurabh Sharma, who is the president of the American Movement. And also we have John Cardillo, who's former NYPD and a GOP strategist. So, gentlemen, welcome to the power panel. And you all heard President Biden's very quick remarks, but at least he addressed the violence on campus. But this coming as Just the News put out this headline: which is Biden doubles down on student debt and Gaza, but poll shows young Americans have other concerns. In recent polling data from the Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics, however, has suggested that the administration is missing the mark with young Americans by addressing foreign conflicts and student debt, as both issues appear to be less important than the key cost of living issues for voters in the critical age range of 18 to 29. In ranking the issues, the survey paired each with another in the slate and represented the frequency with which respondents considered one issue more important than the other. Inflation placed first, with 64% of respondents deeming it more important, followed by healthcare at 59%, housing at 56%, gun violence at 54%, and jobs at 53%. So these stats are interesting. Corruption, 52%, protecting democracy, 52%, women's reproductive rights, 50%, education, 50%, and immigration, 47%, rounded out the top 10 concerns. Placing 15th and 16th, respectively, were Israel/Palestine at only 34% and student debt at 26%, with the pair rounding out the bottom of the list. So the bottom was crime at 47%, climate change, 43%, taxes, 43%, and free speech at only 40%, placed 11th through 14th. So, John, let's start with you. What do you make of young voters?
They're leftist. I mean, when you look at that list, they're leftist from affluent families. They don't care about student debt. They care about gun violence, not protecting the Second Amendment. They care about inflation because the stuff they want to buy that mommy and daddy are giving them money for is getting a little bit more expensive. But it's very concerning because when I look at those metrics, when I look at those answers and those percentages, I see a heavy leftward influence in these young voters, which I think could be problematic for us in November.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, Robin, why are the Democrats then focusing on some of the issues in the top two concerns, it seems like, in the Biden campaign, when the polling, I mean, and this is just one poll, but it seems like even a lot of the sentiment on social media doesn't really reflect those priorities?
It's the low-hanging fruit, Jenna. This he can solve with an executive order, as he's been doing. I get that it's not that popular. I want to say that the average student loan debt for a bachelor's degree for Americans is $38,190. That's less than I thought it was. So maybe people aren't burdened as much as I thought they were with student loan debt repayments. I've got two school-age children, one who will be in college in 2 years. I would have thought it was a bigger concern. But like I said, I think it's just a low-hanging fruit for the Biden campaign. And it's just something he can knock out with an executive order. That's why they went for it.
Interesting. Well, Saurabh, let's bring you into this mix as well. Should the Trump campaign maybe focus then on other priorities? Or as John mentioned, I mean, this does seem like voters are trending extremely leftist. Does that pose a problem for the Trump campaign with young voters?
I think these numbers are actually a little bit telling a different story than the others might have said so, because the issue for the Biden campaign isn't that 50%, 75% of young people aren't going to vote Democrat. The issue is that just like in 2016, if a core constituency of their electorate does not turn out in the percentages that they need to, they will lose this election. Young people have always been a core constituency of the Democratic Party. And if they don't turn out because of this Israel-Palestine issue, or because they don't feel like the Biden administration has bribed them enough with student loan forgiveness, they will have a major problem on their hand and their entire electoral math falls apart. So the Trump campaign should be excited because these issues show that there's not really any case for Biden en masse amongst young people.
Interesting. Well, John, what do you say to that in terms of the opportunity maybe that Team Trump has to shape some of the young voters and get them into the GOP while, you have some other issues that young people are concerned about, like a Republican Congress banning TikTok, but that's also, the Democrats as well. And Joe Biden signed that legislation.
Yeah, look, I think the Republican Party made a very big mistake decades in courting the college students, right? They should have been focusing on pushing people into trades, because when they go into trades and they actually have to get their hands dirty for a living and they're not baristas with a Russian interpretive dance degree, that's where the paper it's printed on, they tend to skew right wing. So I don't know how much, look, I'm going to say something, and I'll get flamed later on social media. But to me, Turning Point USA has been the biggest waste of money in the history of the conservative movement. They took 9 figures out of the movement that could have been deployed effectively, put it on college campuses through black tie events, and we continue to lose more share of the youth vote. And so at this point, I really don't know what you can do beyond hammering home the economic message. Clearly, the border and immigration tie into the crime issue. But if you're going to follow the trends of that poll, what are Republicans going to do? All of a sudden become anti-gun? Start talking up some of these left-wing issues or center-left issues. So I think the only thing they can do is really focus on the economy and tell a story about how the things you buy today will be less expensive. You have to fill up your car. It's going to be less expensive. But then you're going to get these kids that are going to then skew to the green agenda and believe that Tesla is the answer to everything. When there's another great video out of a guy pulling a vehicle on a trailer with a Tesla Cybertruck, and his charge goes from 50% to 9% to 2% in the span of about 15 minutes. So we know that's not the solution. So quite frankly, it's going to be an uphill climb, but I think the economy seems to be the only place to focus because you're wasting money and resources focusing anywhere else.
Yeah, well, I mean, if some of these students are still using daddy's credit card, they may not necessarily care about that. But there's a reason that there is a trend toward the GOP in a rising age group, because once you are hit with all of the responsibilities of actually adulting, then it hits home why capitalism is kind of a bigger deal than, and having lower taxes and some of these other things. And we're already out of time in this segment, but it's fascinating to me to see how maybe some of this that the Biden administration, even the Trump camp, is focusing on really may not resonate with some of the younger voters. Maybe some of the campus violence will finally cause them to actually want law and order. We'll be right back with our power panel right after this. And we are back with our Thursday Power Panel, Robin Biro, Saurabh Sharma, and John Cardillo. So, gentlemen, Donald Trump sat for an interview exclusively with Time. Joe Biden did not. He has actually, according to the statistics, had, and the numbers, had the least amount of interviews so far in his presidency in recent history. But this coming from Time's interview with Donald Trump, exclusive, Trump says anti-white feeling is a problem in the United States. If elected to a second term in the White House, Donald Trump intends to pursue policies that would address what he says is a, quote, definite anti-white feeling, quote unquote, in America. If you look at the Biden administration, they're sort of against anybody depending on certain views. Trump tells Time in an interview, when asked how his supporters who believe anti-white racism now represents a greater problem than anti-black racism. Quote, they're against Catholics, they're against a lot of different people. I think there's a definite anti-white feeling in this country that can't be allowed either. I don't think it would be a very tough thing to address, frankly, Trump says. But I think the laws are very unfair right now, and education is being very unfair, and it's being stifled. But I don't think it's going to be a big problem at all. But if you look right now, there's absolutely a bias against white people, and that's a problem. So, Saurabh, do you agree with Donald Trump?
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the biggest opportunities for a second term. The Supreme Court has given Republicans a ton of surface area to say we're going to go after this totalitarian DEI regime in every sector of American life. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for this whole of government approach to say we're going to go after it in education. We're going to go after it in federal contracting. We're going to go after it in every domain that the president has authority over. And if you do, it will actually be incredible for American society. One, it'll make the culture of American life be more united, but also it'll unleash economic prosperity. There's a ball and chain around the American economy that comes downstream of DEI and ESG, and it's time to rip it out and actually bring merit centrally back into American life.
Well, John, we've seen how the left has harnessed, these terms like Black Lives Matter and, and DEI and, all of these other types of things, and diversity is our strength, blah, blah, blah. And yet when it comes to anyone who is white, and especially the old white male, for example, which Joe Biden happens to be one, actually, then it seems like you can't ever say anything positive about that category. Otherwise, you're now racist or you have white pride or some of these other things that we would never put onto any other demographic. So is Donald Trump right?
Oh, he's 100% right. I mean, and this isn't a new phenomenon. When I took the test to join the NYPD, they pulled 1.4% off of my score, all white males, and distributed it amongst everyone else, right? When I was going through my background investigation, when I was in the academy, there was zero tolerance for white males. If we missed one appointment with our background investigator without a legitimate excusal in advance, if we missed a day at the academy, unless you were deathly ill or had a death in the family, you were fired or you were disqualified from the process. Others got marked NYPD patrol cars to go pick them up and bring them to the academy if there was inclement weather. So this has been going on. But the bigger problem, you could solve it politically, but you have to solve it culturally. Whites are 76% of this nation still. Yet if you turn on the television, and I look at this often, 65 to 75% of TV commercials feature non-white actors. It's completely upside down and misrepresentative. So it's not only a political solution. Republicans have to become better. Conservatives have to become better at creating content, because politics is downstream of culture. Never a truer word was spoken. Unless we also attack the cultural component of this and begin to win that battle, all of our political wins will be for nothing.
Well, Robin, you are the Democrat on the panel. Do you agree with Donald Trump?
This is a mixed bag, actually. I think it's worth having the conversation, Jenna. I just want to say anecdotally, I'm living in Atlanta. I'm in the minority as a white male here in Atlanta. In my Senate district that I'm currently running in for Georgia Senate is 68% black. So I'm definitely in the minority here. But I've been, it's given me some unique insight because one of the things that I've been told a couple of times by the constituents here, the voters here, are that they really want to vote for somebody who looks like them. And I usually turn that right around on them and say, look, I want you to consider me based on my merit. And I can't imagine if I had said the same, that I would only want to vote for someone who looked like me, that would go over very well at all.
Yeah, so I mean, you're maybe evidencing exactly what Donald Trump is saying. And so, Saurabh, to John's point, I mean, do Republicans and conservatives need to be better at addressing this directly instead of kind of playing into the leftist notion that if we are against this whole, diversity is our strength, or we only allow the minorities in this country to say certain things like, I want to vote for people who look like me, and then whites are not given that same privilege, then we're just handing the left kind of this opportunity to harness the messaging, and we need to do better.
Absolutely. We need to stop being afraid. I've said for years that the greatest engines of affirmative action in the United States are the Republican Party, followed shortly by the conservative movement. When Kevin McCarthy was out there recruiting candidates to run for Congress, the memo explicitly said, we're looking for minorities, women, and veterans. This identity politics that we associate with the left is a bipartisan phenomenon, and people need to stop being so scared. I think that there is a sea change. There's a tide turning in this country. I think a lot of Jewish Americans are realizing that you scratch the anti-white phenomenon and you get to anti-Semitism real quick right after that. At the end of the day, people are tired of living in a country where it feels like there's one racial revolution after another every 6 weeks practically. And the only way to end that process is to actually make it okay to be white. There were college signs, there were signs up in college campuses all across the country a few years ago saying that, and everyone lost their mind. I don't have any racial resentment towards white people. I'm not white myself. And I think a lot of people are looking forward to an America where that doesn't have to be the price of entry into any elite institution into American life.
Yeah, well said. And I think the same thing in all of the gender debates have also happened, where it's okay to say I'm proud to be a woman, for example. But if you say, hey, I'm proud to be a guy, then suddenly, you have toxic masculinity and you are for the patriarchy and all of this other nonsense. And so we prioritize, unfortunately, and I think wrongly in this country, these intrinsic characteristics rather than saying that we all have diversity, and that's true, and we shouldn't discriminate on the basis of that. But in practicality, it's okay to be proud proud of who you are, where you've come from, and why, like in Robin's instance, you may be running for office. And it doesn't mean that people have to look exactly like you or come from the same background. We all should be proud to be Americans. I'm very proud to be in the free state of Florida, and I'm proud to be a Floridian. We'll be right back with more of the Power Panel right after this here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. And final topic for today's Power Panel, which includes Robin Biro, Saurabh Sharma, and John Cardillo, comes from Business Insider. This also is from a Trump's Time magazine interview. Trump says he wants huge tariffs if elected. That could send inflation spiking. Trump has plans for at least a 10% universal tariff on U.S. imports, he told Time magazine. He argues that such a levy wouldn't lead to increased inflation, but research from the Bipartisan Tax Foundation suggests otherwise and says Trump's 2018 trade war was also economically damaging. So, Robin, what do you make of this? And, Biden is the one with a really bad economy here. So it seems like anything that Trump says is a better idea than what's going on in the economy right now.
I do think that huge tariffs are a miss, though. So many of our products do come from overseas. But look, I think that one thing that we do need to actually have tariffs on are the EVs, that are the electric vehicles that they want to send to us from Mexico, BYD, those cheap electric vehicles. And look, I got to tell you guys, I had a Jeep and I traded it in on an electric vehicle, and I regret that decision every single day. I don't think we're there
Elon
yet,
Musk,
but
please help.
yeah, yeah. But maybe I agree with the tariffs on EV, the cheap EVs from Mexico. It's the technology is not really that good right yet.
All right. Well, John, what do you think of this policy from Trump? I mean, he had a very strong economy in his first term, and is he setting himself up for more attacks by this type of rhetoric? I mean, clearly, Business Insider, leftist publication, they're not going to like it, but does the base?
Yeah, look, I think a universal tariff is definitely going to rise the cost of goods, right? I mean, you have to think about it. Something's made overseas, a little less expensive. I deal with this every day on the other side of my life, the private equity side of my life. And you buy things from overseas because they cost less to manufacture, and you pass that savings on to the American consumer. Well, now if you're going to put a 10% tariff on them, in addition to the shipping costs and the excise taxes, depending on the type of goods there are, well, then American producers are going to say, all right, well, with the 10% tariff, now you've got a 20% VIG. You've got a 20% overage on those goods with shipping tariffs, FEATs, things like that. We're just going to bump our prices 15%. Well, you're going to pass that 15% price increase to the consumer. I liked his 2016 strategy much better, of using tariffs as leverage against unfriendly state actors like China. But I don't think anyone on the planet can dispute that if you tack 10% onto the cost of any goods, and you do it universally, they cost more. I go diving down in the Cayman Islands all the time. They universally just tack 20% on their dollar, right? So the US dollar is 80 cents. Everything costs more. This is not complicated math. Less money, you're putting out more money for less groceries when you go to the Caymans, for paying 20% more for a piece of scuba gear. So yeah, I don't like a universal tariff. I think we should use tariffs as leverage to get state actors to do things before we start shooting, but no way on universal.
Saurabh, what's your view on this? I mean, the Trump administration in his first term was all about bringing manufacturing back to America, and as John mentioned, using tariffs just as leverage and some of those punitive sanctions. So, is this a good idea in your mind?
I think it's a fantastic idea. I think this underscores how important President Trump is to the Republican Party on this issue of free trade versus fair trade, and on immigration. He is completely at odds with the Wall Street Journal opinion editorial board, with Business Insider, with Forbes, with all these big business publications that cater to corporate elites in our country. Look, they're going to complain, they're going to howl, they're going to scream, they're going to try to stop this. But at the end of the day, the long tail of influence from the first Trump term is bearing fruits. We're in a manufacturing investment super cycle in the United States right now. It's hockey sticked all the way up. And there's a real opportunity right now that if you make outsourcing and producing things abroad just a little bit less competitive, which this tariff would do, that we could see an explosion of blue collar jobs in this country where manufacturing can return. It needs to return for our national security, but also because it's going to help lead to wage increases. During the Trump administration, the first time around, we saw low skilled wages go up for the first time in 50 years. And that was for two reasons. It was because of his trade policy, and it was because he ended the importation of cheap foreign labor at our southern border. It's going to happen again in his second term, and it's going to be one of the most transformative things he does.
Well, but to John's point, I mean, if the cost of goods does increase, which it seems like this would, I mean, doesn't that ultimately go against the bottom line of so many American consumers that, our pocketbooks are really hurting?
Yeah, I mean, Jenna,
Not
let me jump in
necessarily,
there.
because it assumes that things are going to continue to get made there.
Yeah, but here's the
And
fundamental
go ahead,
problem.
John. Sure.
The fundamental problem with this is when Trump came in office, interest rates weren't nearly 12%. The prime rate wasn't where it is now. To build a factory, you need lines of credit. The banks don't have liquidity. I deal with this every day. The banks are essentially out of cash. It's a dire situation that they're not telling the American public. And so without liquidity in the financial markets, without the banks able to lend, and I mean big loans, $1 billion here, $2 billion there. You talk to any of the big commercial banks, they've all been forced to cut their credit lines into blue chip entities, the major cruise lines, manufacturing companies. So yes, in a perfect world, this would work. But if we try this, we are going to be in for so much pain, because it's not a 1-year fix. It might be his whole one-term administration to get the bank's liquidity back to where it needs to be, to write those loans at any rate that would enable that company to pay better wages, to lower the prices to compensate for it not being manufactured offshore and cheaper. Those interest rates are going to eradicate any incentives that tariff might, and it's a big might, put into place. Forget Wall Street. It will be devastating to the American consumer.
And Robin, last question to you. So, we saw that Joe Biden didn't sit down for an interview with Time Magazine, where Donald Trump did, and it was about a 2.5 hour interview. And President Biden, in his remarks earlier today on anti-Semitism and college campus violence, only spent about 2.5 minutes. I mean, is this going to be a problem on the campaign trail when Donald Trump is still chomping at the bit to debate?
Well, Joe Biden did ask for a debate, but I think it was like kind of in a ridiculous way, if I recall. I think it was like, I will debate you tomorrow night with who. There's nobody. I'm running for office right now. I would never agree to do that. Debates require preparation and some coaching.
Trump might,
but look,
do it, yeah. Most people would.
I think he would. I think he would. Yeah, you should not. Let me say that. But I think that we're not seeing enough Biden on the campaign trail. But I want to say this: I think Trump did more of a disservice to himself by appearing for that Time interview. That's all I've been hearing, is that he wants to hike tariffs and that it's going to lead to more inflation. Democrats are using that, as they should. I think that probably keep Joe Biden in the basement. That might be the best course of action.
Yeah, well, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much to our power panel. That's all the time we have tonight for Jenna Ellis Tonight.